One of the ways that we see this theme of self-loathing manifest itself early on in the novel is when Claudia talks about her hatred for the little doll that she received. All the other kids wanted little dolls that looked like Shirley Temple. If you don't know who Shirley Temple was, then just Google it. She was a huge, huge, huge child star back in the 30s and the 40s to some extent. Went on to become a U.S. ambassador and quite a successful person. But at the time, she was idolized because of her little blonde curly hair and her little blue eyes and all this kind of stuff. So every kid wanted a doll that looked like Shirley Temple, and they all wanted to look like her. But not Claudia. Claudia basically says, I destroyed white baby dolls. But the dismembering of dolls was not the true horror. The truly horrifying thing was the transference of the same impulses to little white girls. She would take apart the dolls. She wanted to know what made the doll talk, which is kind of interesting because what she's doing psychologically is trying to figure out what is the magic that this doll has. Why do people find this doll attractive and not maybe another doll with a different look, different skin color or hair or shape of eyes or whatever? Why is this beautiful? What's behind the beauty that makes it magical of some sort? Why does everybody like this? In other words, what's in it that makes it tick, in other words. And so she transfers that to white girls. The indifference with which I could have axed them was shaken only by my desire to do so, to discover what eluded me, the secret of the magic they weaved on others. What made people look at them and say, "Aw," but not me? She said, if I pinched them, their eyes, unlike the crazed glint of the baby doll's eyes, would fold in pain, and their cry would not be the sound of an icebox door, but a fascinating cry of pain. When I learned how repulsive this disinterested violence was, that it was repulsive because it was disinterested, my shame floundered about for refuge. So she knows it's wrong, and she's like, this is really awful. What I'm doing is really terrible. But the question is, what makes you do that kind of thing? And she's a kid, right? She's just a kid. The best hiding place was love. Thus the conversion from pristine sadism to fabricated hatred to fraudulent love. In other words, when I realized what I was doing was really horrible, then what did I do? I took refuge in fraudulent love, whatever she means by that. It was a small step to Shirley Temple. I learned much later to worship her, just as I learned to delight in cleanliness, knowing, even as I learned that the change was adjustment without improvement. That's a really great line. On this slide this video, I've got a couple of her great lines here. Two of them from the novel itself, and one just from, she's just the master of one-line beautiful quotations that really make you think. So, for example, a little black girl yearns for the blue eyes of a little white girl, and the horror at the heart of her yearning is exceeded only by the evil of fulfillment. Right? The horror at the heart of her yearning, like it's a terrible thing to want to be something that you're not. But that terrible thing is only exceeded by the evil that results if you actually achieve it, becoming something you're not. Right? Another point that she makes here in the novel, a quote that she makes, love is never any better than the lover. That is some profound wisdom right there. Listen to that very carefully, right? If you've ever been in a bad relationship, man, you better know this line. You better know this quotation. Love is never any better than the lover. You're never going to find that the love that you have with somebody is going to be any better than that person is, because wicked people love wickedly, violent people love violently, weak people love weakly, stupid people love stupidly, but the love of a free man is never safe, right? Think about that one for a moment. The love of a free man is never safe. It's not a safe kind of love. Somebody who's disconnected, someone who doesn't feel attachment, someone who is kind of a floating free radical. She also has this wonderful line here, the ability of writers to imagine what is not the self, to familiarize the strange and mystify the familiar is the test of their power. Is she able to do that for you, right? You didn't grow up like Piccola, hopefully, or maybe even Claudia, but can you put yourself in that person's position, either one of them? And if you can do that, then she's done her job as a writer. She wants you to experience what is outside of your life experience. We also see early on that this novel has a lot of real serious sexual dysfunction in it. I mean, obviously, the Piccola's rape is just the most horrific thing. But there are also some really weird people and a lot of serious sexual dysfunction. Mr. Henry, who you just can't say any other thing about him other than he's just a nasty little old pedophile is what he is. He's gross and he's weird and he's a sicko and he hides things in his clothing so that the kids will like, ugh. And then he's hanging out with these prostitutes, and the prostitutes themselves are really products of this sort of sexually dysfunctional society. This stands in such stark contrast, for example, to the Dick and Jane world of this clean, white, phenomenon, a family that is faithful, that monogamous, all those ideas, which frankly nobody ever lived up to, right? I mean, there's no family that's been that perfect. That's ridiculous. But when you set those kinds of things up, and then you look around the world that you live in, and you say, my gosh, I lived in a neighborhood with hookers and pedophiles, and then Soaphead Church. Oh my word. What a sick basket case he is. He's repulsed by any thought of sexuality at all. So he's a total head case in some cases, except prepubescent girls, which he doesn't kind of sort of want to like touch, but, admires in, I guess, a quasi-sexual sense. It's just very, very, very odd. And his whole background is being this sort of mystic that he's able to sort of mesmerize, especially the women in the community. On the one hand, the community that Claudia is describing is an incredibly colorful, diverse community. But in almost every case, there's some dysfunction. Soaphead Church's letter to God, the most blasphemous thing you'd ever see. Someone who has, even, the very idea of having visions of grandeur, this exceeds that by far. It's a stunningly blasphemous thing to write. Let's see if I can find a little passage out of it to just illustrate what I'm talking about here. He says, the little black girl that came a-looning at me today, tell me, Lord, how could you leave a lass so long, so lone that she could find her way to me? How could you? I weep for you, Lord. It is because I weep for you that I had to do your work for you. And what does he do? Of course, he gets Pecola to poison the dog because he's disgusted by the dog, but he's also disgusted by Pecola. And he says, I had to do your work for you because you're not much of a god. He goes on to say, I did what? You did not. I did what you did. I did what you did not, could not, would not do. I looked at that ugly little black girl and I loved her. I played you, and it was a very good show. I have caused a miracle. I gave her the eyes. Of course, she walks away thinking that she has blue eyes when she doesn't, right? Cobalt blue. Having therefore imbibed, as it were, of the nectar, I am not afraid of you, of death, not even of life. And it's all right about Velma, and it's all right about Papa, and it's all right about the Greater and the Lesser Antilles. Quite all right. Quite. With kindest regards, I remain your Elihu Micah Whitcomb, right? Soaphead. So it's just a very, very strange individual, to say the least. But even the people, now this is a very important part, because, she can show you several characters who you think, whoa, these people are really warped. Not just Charlie, but Polly and Mr. Henry and the prostitutes, okay, Maginot Line and the others, who have this very, very, they're either delusional, or they're violent, or they're reactive in some way that's destructive, or they're just incredibly cynical, like the prostitutes in the neighborhood. Use people. It doesn't matter. You've been used. You might as well get yours. And you make men. They don't really. The men think they're using the women, and the women think they're using the men. It's a really sad, disgusting kind of self-destructive circle that they're in there. But now this is important. Even the category of individuals in the community that look publicly as though these people are normal, these people are okay, these people are above all this, these people are good, solid, respectable people. They have their lives together. Claudia Morrison, behind that voice, is pointing out to you that these people don't have it together either. And what she's talking about here are these good Christian African-American girls who she criticizes enormously throughout here, and it culminates in the discussion of Geraldine and the cat, which is just a terrible thing. You think, well, you look at their little homes and their lives, and they're good Christian women, and they raise their families, and they keep their homes neat and tidy, and they go and join all these different societies, and they improve the neighborhood. But behind that, neat, clean little, picket fence facade, there's a kind of an obsessive compulsive thing. Like, their husbands walk on eggshells around their houses. It's a little funny at first. There's a little bit of humor behind it where you say, here's this big guy who comes home and he can't feel comfortable in his own home because his wife is so in charge of where everything's put and where everything's decorated and how everything is. But behind that is a kind of an OCD kind of thing, I guess. I don't know. The desire to order their home and what that is an attempt to exert control over their home in a world where they feel they have no control because of their marginalization and alienation, right? Now think about that for a moment, that I can't control the world. I can't make it, but I can make my corner of it my thing, and I can control it, and I can keep it clean, and I can keep it respectable, and I'm going to do my hair and I'm going to wear outfits and do my hair and do my makeup and try to look as white and behave as white as I can because I need that respect. I'm not getting that. And I think one of Morrison's point is that you can chase that all you want to, but you're never going to be them. And they're never going to see you that way if you try to do that, right? To be as respectable in the eyes of the white majority, to live the way the white majority lives as much as to imitate, to mimic that behavior, to mimic that lifestyle. And it means you're never comfortable being who you are. And secondly, if you think that's the way to gain their respect, you're going to be very disappointed because the reason they don't respect you isn't because you're not like them. The reason they don't respect you is because you're of a different they see you as a completely different category. And you can be as white acting as you want to. This is very controversial stuff. I think this is what Morrison's driving at when presenting these characters, is to say, you can try to be as much like your white neighbors as possible, but the racism that underpins their attitude, you're never going to be accepted. You won't be. And underneath that, all that stuff is this story of Geraldine and the cat, which, as you know from reading the novel, Piccola comes over to the house. The little boy is just a horrible little brat. And he's been doted on by his mother and spoiled and indulged and everything, and he can do no wrong. The cat gets injured, I guess dies. I don't remember whether it dies or not, but doesn't really matter in some respects. Does it die? I know it goes back by, I think it died. Scalded by the heater and everything. On page 91, if you look at what she says there, it's almost as though her criticism of Piccola and the things she says about Piccola and to Piccola aren't being said to Piccola at all. They're being said to herself in a way, because she's embarrassed. Do you remember when we were discussing Flannery O'Connor and Ruby Turpin, and how Ruby Turpin despises white trash people, low-class whites? She's embarrassed by them. She finds them humiliating. She doesn't want to even be around them because they remind her of the fact that her construct of racial class and racial profiling and class and all these kinds of things is flawed, right? Because all white people should be better than all other people, right? In Ruby's mind. But here you got this category of people, and they're just disgusting and gross, and they should be better than they are. And you see sort of an African-American counterpart to that in Geraldine, don't you? So on page 91, she says, she looked at Piccola, saw the dirty, torn dress, the plaits sticking out of her head, her hair matted where the plaits had come undone, the muddy shoes with the wad of gum peeping out from between the cheap soles, the soiled socks, one of which had been walked down into the heel of the shoes. She saw the safety pin holding the hem of the dress up over the hump of the cat's back. She looked at her. She had seen this little girl all of her life, hanging out of windows over saloons in Mobile, crawling over the porches of shotgun houses on the edge of town, sitting in bus stations holding paper bags and crying to mothers who kept saying, shut up. They sat crowded into pews at churches, taking space from the nice, neat, colored children. They clowned on the playgrounds, broke things in dime stores, ran in front of you on the street, made ice slides on the sloped sidewalks in the winter. Get out, she said with her voice quiet. You nasty little black bitch, get out of my house. Think of that. Just think of that. There's a lot of psychological baggage in that kind of response to a small child who can't help how she looks and can't help how poor and disheveled she is. Pecola turned to find the front door and saw Jesus, right? The portrait, Jesus looking down at her with sad and unsurprised eyes, his long brown hair parted in the middle, the gay paper flowers twisted around his face. Outside, the March wind blew into the rip in her dress. She held her head down against the cold, but she could not hold it low enough to avoid seeing the snowflakes falling and dying on the pavement. Geraldine's response is so much less about this person, Pecola, than she is about an entire category of black children that she just despises because she's embarrassed by them. Why can't they behave? This is why white people don't treat us better, because they look at these people and I'm just embarrassed by my own. You see, that's really, why do you need to feel like you have to take ownership of that? Why do you feel that way? First of all, there's a very good reason why Pecola appears and acts the way she does. She's not a terrible child, but she's the way she is because she's had a terrible upbringing and an abusive upbringing. You know, there's no attempt on Geraldine's part to look beyond that and ask, what is that about? Where did that come from? How did she become what she is? There's no attempt at that whatsoever. Instead, it's just, I despise you because you're something I don't like to be reminded of. And you're the reason I'm embarrassed in front of white people to be black. Guys, that is just such deep psychological insight on Morrison's part. It can come only from, experience and life, that she saw this and said, this needs to be written about. It's not a novel, in my opinion, it's not a novel so much about discrimination, although it is, as it is about the impact of that discrimination on the people who are being discriminated against. What does it do to you? So it's really more about Morrison saying, I'm writing this for people like me who grew up in this society. How do we cope with this? What are the responses to this? And what are we to do about this as individuals who have experienced it? And that's really important because is it a socially conscious novel? Well, of course it is. Of course it is. But it's also a very personal novel written for sometimes younger African-American girls and boys, I think, in some respects. Is it an adolescent novel? No, hardly. But it's about adolescence. It's about childhood. And it's about what forms us and makes us. At the end, of course, Pecola just, has this dissociative personality and engages in just psychosis. I mean, it's whatever you want to call it. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist, but just totally loses touch with reality. And, essentially suffers from a sort of a a multiple personality situation, but is totally deluded in thinking she does have blue eyes. That's important and interesting and shocking. But what's more interesting, I think, is this final reflection at the end of the novel on Claudia's part. She says on page 204, so it was. A little black girl yearns for the blue eyes of a little white girl, and the horror at the heart of her yearning is exceeded only by the evil of fulfillment, as the quote from the bottom there of the video shows you. In other words, the eyes are really just emblematic of something much bigger going on, right? I want blue eyes. I want blue eyes. That's just in microcosm what all folks who are alienated and marginalized feel about not being able to conform to, the dominant culture's expectations, Okay. After the baby came too soon and died, the baby did, Picola's baby dies. The damage done was total. She spent her days, her tendril, sap green days, walking up and down, her head jerking to the beat of the drummer so distant only she could hear. Elbows bent, hands on shoulders, she flailed her arms like a bird in an eternal, grotesquely futile effort to fly. Beating the air, a winged but grounded bird intent on the blue void it could not reach, could not even see, but which filled the valleys of the mind. Never, never went near, because we had failed her. Our flowers never grew. I was convinced that Frida was right, that I'd planted them too deeply, so we avoided Picola breedlove forever. Now this is the important passage, among all the waste and beauty of the world, which is what she herself was, all of our waste, which we dumped on her and which she absorbed. Think about that. What waste is she talking about? We dumped our waste on her and she absorbed it. She didn't fight back. She couldn't. She was not able to do that. And all of our beauty, which was hers first and which she gave to us, all of us, all who knew her, felt so wholesome after we cleaned ourselves on her, right? When I stand up next to her, I feel good about myself because I'm not that. I'm not that. I'm not her. We were so beautiful when we stood astride her ugliness. Her simplicity decorated us. Her guilt sanctified us. I'm not her. You know, I didn't have an incestuous situation, right? So I'm better than that. Her pain made us glow with health. Her awkwardness made us think we had a sense of humor. Her inarticulateness made us believe we were eloquent. Her poverty kept us generous. She was the anti-us, and thereby made us feel better, is what she's saying. And she led us, and thereby deserved our contempt. She didn't fight back, so of course we didn't respect her because of that. She almost acquiesced in what we did to her, and therefore made us feel like she deserved it. We honed our egos on her, padded our characters with her frailty, and yawned in the fantasy of our strength. And fantasy it was, for we were never strong, only aggressive. That's really interesting. There's a difference between being strong and aggressive, isn't there? The two things are not the same thing. We were not free, merely licensed. In other words, freedom is different from just the ability to do whatever you want to. That's not what real freedom is. We were not compassionate. We were polite. Difference between compassion and politeness, right? One's a social convention. The other one, compassion, is true caring for another person. Not good, but well-behaved. There's a difference between being well-behaved and actually being a good person. Love is never any better than the lover. Wicked people love wickedly. Violent people love violently. Weak people love weakly. Stupid people love stupidly. But the love of a free man is never safe. There is no gift for the beloved. The lover alone possesses his gift of love. The loved one is shorn, neutralized, frozen in the glare of the lover's inward eye. Right? I talk about how I did not plant the seeds too deeply, how it was the fault of the earth, the land, of our town. I even think now that the land of the entire country was hostile to marigolds that year. We're not really talking about marigolds, are we? That this soil is bad for certain kinds of flowers. We're not talking about flowers, are we? When the land kills of its own volition, we acquiesce and say the victim had no right to live. We're wrong, of course, but it doesn't matter. It's too late, at least on the edge of my town, among the garbage and the sunflowers of my town. It's much, much, much too late. It's a very profound end to the novel. I'll let you ponder that a little bit. What I want to do next is talk about the quiz and the final exam. We won't have a discussion thread in Blackboard this week. The quiz is below. Please send it to me by Monday night at midnight to my Yahoo email, and it is totally extra credit, so pick up some extra credit. And by the way, don't tell other people who didn't read the novel and didn't see these lectures what the quiz is and where to find it, because they didn't earn it. You did. The final exam will be on Tuesday, and of course the final exam questions are on Blackboard, and so look there. Okay? We will see you during the final exam.